Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Does your office have a well-crafted and workable financial policy? If you're like most practices, you have some form of policy that patients sign off on with their initial paperwork. Something that says they're responsible for payment for any procedures performed at the time of service, and so on. And for the average practice, that's about the extent of it. But really, that's just half the equation. You should actually have two types of financial policy in your practice. You'd have a policy for your patients, which we call an external financial policy, and a policy for your team only, what we'd call an internal financial policy. This team policy would detail the rules on how patients are supposed to pay for services, what is considered acceptable, and what isn't. And while this internal policy may not seem like a big deal, I can't overstate its importance. Lack of policy in this area can cost your practice dearly in terms of added confusion, lower collections, staff conflict, and reduced treatment acceptance. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX, how to create a successful internal office financial policy. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And I want to start this out by looking at the concept of policy in general. We go over it extensively on the MGE program because, it's important. So what is policy? Essentially, it's the rules for your practice, the rules, how things are supposed to be done. They're, the things that we're supposed to follow and how it's crafted and how it's made. There's a lot to go into on this. I'm not going to get into it in a podcast, but essentially you want your policy to be workable, meaning you don't want policies in place that are destructive or problematic or that just don't work. And that statement in and of itself can be a bit of a loaded statement because you might have a policy that actually is workable or good, but then the personnel that are using that policy aren't applying it properly, and then you end up being told that the policy is bad. Let me give you an example. So let's say you implement a scheduling policy of some kind. We talked about this a little bit a few episodes ago as far as crafting your schedule or creating a schedule that works. But let's say you have a policy that primary appointments, larger production, larger dollar value appointments are done in the morning. That's when you want to do them, and you have time blocked on the schedule for this. So you have a schedule coordinator that maybe just isn't very good at handling patients. They have difficulty handling patients. So, people are going to object to this sometimes because everybody would prefer to come in after work. They want your schedule would be booked from 5 to 8 p.m. from here and for the next 6 months, and your mornings would be empty if you just did what patients wanted, but you have to run your practice the way that you want to run it. So, the scheduler has trouble handling patients, so they tell the patient, okay, these 4 crowns you need to have done. The doctor does these procedures in the morning, and the patient says, well, I can't miss work. I only want to come in after 5 p.m. So not knowing what to do with that, because it's actually extremely easy to handle, and we talked about it in that episode, and we go into that more also in our scheduling seminar. I'll put a link on the episode webpage and other places. But the point being is they don't know what to do with this communication from the patient, and this happens a couple of times. So then you find that your mornings are empty, and you ask your schedule coordinator or your office manager, why are my mornings empty? Well, this isn't really that workable. Patients can't miss work. You can't tell patients what to do or whatever. So at that point, you could just scrap the policy. You could go, well, I guess this just doesn't work. I'm going to have to work 6 days a week and, evenings and weekends in order to accommodate all of my patients. When in that case, it wasn't that the policy was the problem, because I can show you hundreds, if not thousands, of practices that run their schedule this way effectively. The problem was the personnel implementing the policy. So you dance a pretty fine line between what's workable and what's not workable. You could have something that's blatantly just bad, right? Where you do something with your hours or your financial policy that you yourself wouldn't even follow, and then you try to implement it and it's destructive to your business, right? But you have to be careful when you're deciding whether the policy works or not based upon how it's actually rolled out, I guess is the lesson of it. So policy is the rules. The policy is the rules. So now, who sets policy? Now, ultimately, the person who has to approve all policy is the owner doctor. and that is non-negotiable. You can have people suggest policy, your schedule coordinator, financial coordinator, dental assistant, your hygienist, any of your team, your office manager can suggest policy, and sometimes that's very helpful because that's the person on the ground dealing with this all the time, right? So they can suggest a policy, but ultimately you as the doctor owner have to agree to it and approve it. If that isn't set up in your practice, that's going to be a problem because there's two things that can happen. Because let's take a look at what happens when there's no policy in an area or you have people setting policy that you haven't approved. Let's first take a look at what happens when you have no policy. So let's say I have no policy with relation to, let's take something simple, how to take a day off in our practice. If you want to take a day off that you're normally supposed to work, and there's no policy on this. So then if people don't have policy, they generally, it's not that people crave rules or crave policy, but they want some type of operational rule to run by. So if you haven't given me any type of a guidelines on what I have to do to take a day off, I'm going to create my own. Maybe it's what I used at the last company I worked for. At the last practice I worked for, I would just note in the schedule that I was going to be taking a personal day this day, and that's how I take a day off. Whatever that was, if you don't give me any guidelines as to what that is, I'm going to create it myself. And you see this a lot, whether it's taking a day off, ordering dental supplies, or with finances, patient balances. Let's say you have 3 people up at the front desk and you haven't specialized them with relation to division of labor, which you should, but let's just say you haven't. So you have 3 different people who are going to end up making financial arrangements from time to time. So you have employee A, B, and C. So you've just presented a larger treatment plan and you send this person up front to work out how they're going to pay. And they see employee A. Well, employee A likes to get paid. So they tell the patient they should pay in full right now, prepay, and save 5% or whatever. They've invented a prepay policy for your practice. So you get paid immediately if employee A is seeing this patient. Employee B doesn't really feel comfortable with that. Employee B likes taking half now and half later. And employee C lets the patient decide on their own payment plan. Because employee C doesn't think that patient should have to pay that much. So, how much can you pay for this $6,000 treatment plan of which you're going to owe, $5,000. Oh, you can pay $10 a week? That sounds great. So you'll be paid off in the next 10 years. So in that case, you have people setting their own policy based on what they feel is the right way to do things. The problem is, even though they have a vested interest in the practice as an employee, they don't own the business, so they can't set the rules. So then you're going to have this instantaneous point of disagreement that at that point, not just between them, but also with you. So if you're the doctor owner and you're sending a patient up front to pay, you're hoping employee A is available. And if employee A isn't, you're desperately searching for employee B. And oh man, I hope employee C doesn't see this person because I'm not going to get paid. You have an instant disagreement. You disagree with how something's being done in your business, which, say that to yourself several times. That's a little weird because you're the one who decides how things are done in your business. So if you don't set policy as to how things are supposed to be done, people are going to set their own, and that's when you have problems. Because then you might even end up with a conflict between employees A, B, and C. Employee A disagrees with the way employee C collects money. Employee B thinks they're both wrong, and they're all in conflict, and they're telling each other how wrong they are. It's just not a good setup. And that will lead to, confusion, lack of team cohesiveness. Everybody's doing something different. And also there's no predictability. Let's say you have a policy in your practice, and this may be an unwritten policy, but it should be written, that the dental assistant is supposed to stay until the doctor is done with the patient. It's kind of common sense, right? And believe me, I've heard all these stories where it's 5 p.m. and the dental assistant's mid a procedure with the doctor. They see the clock on the wall or look at their watch, and they're just gone. Doctor turns around and they're just gone. They thought they went to the to sterilization to grab something or the lab, and no, they just left. They put their coat on and split, right? Well, you look at that and you go, well, that's ridiculous, right? But let's say you have no policy on this. So then you don't know if the assistant's going to stay or go. The office manager doesn't know. The other assistant doesn't know. It creates this lack of predictability, right? Same thing with the schedule, right? If there's no policy and you don't have when certain types of procedures are supposed to be done, you'll come in and there's no production in the morning or patients scheduled wherever, depending on who's doing the scheduling. Lastly is if you don't have policy set in your practice, right, or you have people setting it themselves, you're going to have a hard time detecting problem personnel. Now, I won't get into all the specifics regarding this, but one way you can tell if you have a problem with a particular personnel is they don't follow policy or they tend to change it, right? But if there is no policy, how are you going to tell if you have a problem personnel in the first place? Let's say we set a sensible financial policy in the practice, which I'll talk about here in a second as far as different ways you can go about doing that. I also have a handout you can download for it. Let's say we set a sensible financial policy on different ways patients can pay. Okay, and we have, again, employees A, B, and C. And employees A and B, for the most part, follow it. They have no problems with it, and, patients pay the different ways that are acceptable to pay. Well, employee C does not follow this financial policy. And keep in mind, when employee C doesn't follow it, they're not going to just not follow it blatantly and say, I think your policy stinks. You're going to get all kinds of excuses. Well, that patient couldn't pay, or that patient disagreed, or that patient this, or this policy's bad. Because again, people don't like to be wrong, or at least show themselves up as wrong. That's the rare individual who will do that. So you're going to get all kinds of reasons why it was okay not to follow the policy. The point is, it doesn't matter what reasons are being advanced. If the person can't follow sensible office policy, you're going to have problems with this person, because that's the stuff that you are seeing. I want you to imagine this for a second. You're not watching your employees all day long. You're watching them. Usually your interaction is when you're, dealing with them directly, or the interaction in this example is when they've messed something up. So if they're messing that one thing up and you're seeing this a couple times a week, there's lots of other things that they're messing up that you're just not seeing. So if you don't have effective or workable policy in place, you're going to have trouble detecting if you have a problem personnel. So that's another reason why you want to have policy in these areas. So, and policy can be very simple and sweeping, right? Like we never let a patient leave the office upset. That could be an office policy. Or it might be very specific. You might have one where, these are the steps on how to clean the plaster trap, or this is how we do, weekly equipment maintenance. It can be whatever. It doesn't matter. But policy are the rules. I'll figure this out eventually, the plural or not plural. Policy sets your rules. And again, the doctor has to approve it. So again, most offices have some form of financial policy that is disseminated to patients. Usually it's, again, with the onboarding paperwork, new patient paperwork, and it's very general that essentially that person is responsible for any balance that they're going to have. It doesn't get very specific. It might say we take Visa, MasterCard, and American Express and Discover. It doesn't get very, very detailed, all right? And I've had people ask me, should I get into the detailed internal financial policy with patients when I bring them in? I mean, you can. There's nothing wrong with it, but even if you do, one thing I want to keep in mind is, let's say you have 4 different ways, because again, we're mainly talking about larger treatment plans or major treatment here. But let's say you have 4 different ways a patient can take care of their balance, and you put that in their onboarding paperwork, their new patient paperwork, and then a year later, or even 2 weeks later, you're presenting a larger treatment plan. They're not necessarily directly connecting, what you're explaining to them to the stuff they signed. In other words, oh yeah, I remember signing that a year ago. You would have to, again, share the payment options with them as you're presenting it, is the point. So there's nothing wrong with doing it, but the fact that they signed it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to remember it when you go to present it again. All right? So, generally, you're going to have some type of policy for the patient, but let's talk about crafting that internal policy. Now, this policy is for your staff. I'm an employee, I'm the treatment coordinator, I'm the financial coordinator, and the office manager. I have to know what are the acceptable ways for patients to take care of their balance. So now I do have a handout for you on this that I'm kind of following along with, or at least mentioning some of the points that are included in. It's called Financial Policies. It's actually one of the downloads from DDS Success, our online training platform, from the Financial Coordinator training course. And you can download it if you want. The link to download it is on the episode webpage. And it lays out, how to craft internal financial policies. So it's fairly useful. You can check it out. But anyway, if I'm crafting this policy, I'm going to have initially sort of the general ideas. What is acceptable and what's not? In other words, I don't want 30-day balances. I want the estimated copayment for smaller stuff taken care of at the time of service or before the patient goes back, whatever you do in your practice. I mean, look, if you're doing 2 occlusal composites, which cost $400 and they have 80% coverage and they're going to owe $80 at the end of the visit, the fact that they wait till the end of the visit is fine. In my opinion, you have to do, again, and this is the cool part with financial policy, this is what's real to you as the owner doctor, not to me. I can give you suggestions, but this is your practice. You have to do what you are comfortable with. So let's say I would be comfortable with that personally. If smaller procedures with very small copays, or even just, let's say it's a patient with no insurance and they're getting a cleaning and it's $250, fine, I'll collect that when they're done with their appointment, right? I don't have a huge problem with that. I mean, obviously, if you have a lot of balances like that banging around that are not being collected, that's a problem, and that can add up, right? But usually, from at least my experience, it's not going to be a humongous problem. But we want that covered in the policy as far as like what is expected and what isn't. So usually this policy is really going to shine when we're dealing with larger cases or major services, right? Where you're going to be reserving time on your schedule, extensive time on your schedule, or there's going to be a considerable lab fee or material cost, you're buying implants, etc. That's when this financial policy becomes critical. If you're doing a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $60,000 case for an all-on 4 or 6, that's when we need to know exactly how our patient's going to pay. So it would include what would be considered an acceptable form of payment, which a few ideas on this, you could always have the patient prepay. Now, you can do a number of things with prepayment. I'm a fan of prepayment because, well, number one, it's an easy way to eliminate cancellations and no-shows. Now, that's not to say someone who prepays won't cancel, but let me tell you, if I just paid $5,000 for a procedure that you're going to do on me, there's a much better chance of me showing up than if I paid zero, right? But let's say prepay. I've paid in full for this procedure. You might have some form of a prepayment discount. You could even do a prepayment discount. It could be 5%. It could be on a sliding scale, depending on the size of the case, anywhere from 2% up to 8 or 10%, whatever works for you is the point. But let's say, just for simplicity's sake, we say our prepaid discount is 5%. Now, how are we going to use this? Most likely, I'm not going to chase somebody who's going to come in, their next appointment is an occlusal composite. I'm not going to chase them to prepay for their occlusal composite, right? So they can save 5% on $200, right? This is, again, mainly for larger procedures. So what does prepay mean? It means that you've just presented the treatment plan and the patient pays now. They've put it on a credit card, or they've written you a check, or whatever. It means they've paid now. It doesn't mean that they're going to pay the day the procedure is done or the day before the procedure. There's always some degree of flexibility with that. Let's say it's Monday. I've presented the case to the patient. They say, yeah, I would like to prepay. It's a larger case. I'm going to have to do something with my retirement account. It's going to take me 2 or 3 days, and then I can give you the money. Yeah, I would still be okay with that. That's fine, right? They're going to prepay. They're working on paying me. But let's say I'm presenting a case and it's a, $20,000 case, and they're going to save 5%, and they're going to be coming in 2 weeks, and they're going to pay me 2 days before, just because that's not a prepay. Prepay means they pay like now or as close to now as possible. Now, the question I get asked is, how do you use prepay with regards to credit cards and financial companies? Personally, and again, remember, this is Jeff's opinion, folks. This is not, you have to do what is real to you. If it's me, I am not going to penalize the patient if they use a credit card when prepaying. If your credit card merchant fees are normal, they're not going to be excessive, which, again, I could go off on that for a while because, you'll switch merchants, and it's because it's a 1.8% with the new one, but for some reason, it always works out to 3.1%. I don't know why. There's the space shuttle fee and the interchange fee and this fee and that fee, whatever. But to me, that's not that big of a deal. It just isn't. So let's say I'm offering a prepaid discount. You have $10,000 worth of treatment. You want to prepay. I'm going to give you the normal prepaid discount that I offer, whether you give me a check or a credit card, and I'm not going to bat an eye. Okay? I would not apply it when using patient financing. If let's say I'm doing a financing plan that's 2 years long and I'm going to be eating 14.99%, there's no way I'm giving you an additional prepaid discount. That is, to me, patient financing is something completely different. All right. And I'm eating a much larger portion when I'm doing that. So I'm not going to be doing that. So now, finance companies, again, as far as financial arrangements, since we're crafting our financial policy, so you might have prepay as an option. Let's say we have payment plans as an option. Well, let's take a look at the different types of payment plans. You might have an internal payment plan, and you'll have external payment plans, which are finance companies. Internal payment plans, again, remember, this is my opinion. I'm just giving you suggestions. You probably don't want to go beyond half down, half later, or a third, a third, a third. When you start extending past that, if you're doing 1 year, 2 year payment plans, that's when it's probably time to send it to a finance company, Care Credit, Lending Club, Sunbit, whomever, right? Proceed. You're going to start using those folks because you're now extending this out real far and your office isn't a collection agency or a bank. Then it becomes more difficult. You end up building up this big AR. And it's not that the patients won't pay. I mean, that'll happen in certain cases, but you then have to pay an employee to follow this up, and it becomes a bit of a pain. And I might even, to a degree, tighten things up a little bit when I'm doing the half down or the half later payment plan, where let's say I have a patient who wants to give me half now. And I would probably attach it to time, not delivery dates. Not a huge fan of attaching it to delivery dates because what if the patient runs into some type of financial problem and now you end up with a lab case that's not going to fit in 3 to 6 months from now? So you're better off attaching it to time. You know, you're going to pay half now and half 30 days from now, or a third now, a third 30 days from now, and a third 30 days later, which again, you're now running a bit of a risk because what if you've delivered the case in 45 days? It's a done deal and the patient still owes you a balance. You always have the risk that that could become a problem. This is why I like to tighten these things up a little bit. You have some type of mechanism in your practice, and you can work with your attorney to create a form for this where the patient has agreed to pay half now, half later, and they've signed an agreement where on exactly 30 days from now you're going to be charging XYZ credit card for their balance, or you have an ability to debit their checking account, an ACH debit, which you have to set up with your bank. And again, I would have forms for this. You need to where you can debit their account, so it's not something where you need to call them for the balance, or they're going to mail you a check, or they're going to do a transfer. It should be as close to automatic as possible. I'm comfortable with that because, why not? And truthfully, if this should be part of the financial discussion when you're doing the treatment presentation, because you could end up costing yourself a lot of money if you don't do this. So let me give you an example. Let's say it's a $6,000 case and the patient, you instantaneously go, hey, let's just use patient financing. And they go on 2-year financing. It's a $6,000 case. So you're eating 15%, $900 because they're on 2-year no interest financing. Well, you probably could have avoided doing that if you had asked them when you were presenting the treatment. They go, well, look, I'd like to be on a payment plan. You go, well, okay, well, how much could you pay per month? They go, well, I could pay $2,000 a month. Okay, this is a 3-month payment plan. So what I would do in that case is, if you have a finance company that allows for a 3-month payment plan where you're not eating 15%, use that. Or you do the third, and you're eating nothing. You're just eating the credit card fee or the auto debit fee or whatever, and you don't lose that $900. And you make it as automatic, like I said, as possible to make sure that you actually get paid. So let's say it's going to go beyond that, right? It's going to be more than a third, or half down. It's going to go beyond that. We're going to be getting into a payment plan. And actually, you know what? Not to digress, but there's this other concept of putting a deposit down to secure time in the schedule. I have mixed feelings on that because, again, it depends on the deposit. Let's say it's $7,000 worth of treatment, and you go, Jeff, you have to put 10% down in order to reserve time in my book. Have we figured out how I'm paying the other 90% yet? When is that discussion supposed to happen? Am I supposed to pay 10% today and 90% when I come in? I mean, that's a lot easier to bail on than if I had paid the thing in full, or I already have a signed financial arrangement where I'm paying half down or a third. So I think it's better than nothing because, if there's no way to secure time on your schedule, it's much easier for me to no-show. And it's not just easier for me to no-show. What it is it's easier for me to fool you. All right, so let me explain, because this goes back to the sales process. So if you've told me I need $7,000 worth of treatment and I go, wow, doc, that sounds great. Maybe I wouldn't say that, but I'm excited about getting the treatment done. Maybe I'm not excited about the $7,000, but I say, doc, that sounds great. When am I coming in? Okay, you got me scheduled for next Tuesday. Awesome, I'll bring a check with me that day. I can say that to you, leave, and you could never hear from me again. You get a call from my wife the night of my appointment asking for my records. I never answer the phone and I no-show. I got out of your office. The reason why is you never actually made me commit to anything, which is really sort of a test in a way. If I tell you, I forgot my checkbook, this, that, let me go home and I'll call you back, I might be lying just to get out of your office. And I'm not saying to get into this whole, is the person telling the truth or not? That's immaterial. The reason you're asking me to commit is to see, do I actually want to do it? Because if I'm not paying, we've talked about this in prior episodes. If it's sticking on the money or I'm not paying or whatever, there's something else that I'm fixated on. Maybe I don't want to do the treatment. Maybe I'm worried about drills and needles. Who knows? But if it's sticking on the money and it's back and forth on the money or whatever, you should probably dig back into, do I actually want the treatment plan? But I like some form of a commitment. Again, I'm not a fan of a deposit. I'd rather just fully figured out financial arrangements before the patient walks out of the office. And again, if we're going beyond that third, now we're into an extended payment plan, and this is when I would use a finance company. But again, I would have that discussion ahead of time because I might not have to use a finance company and cost myself money that I don't need. Which brings up this next point. All of you know Sabrina now because we've done a number of episodes together. We were talking about this episode earlier. And she mentioned the issue of predeterminations. Like, what are you talking about, predeterminations? Like, I know that some people do these. I did not realize how many people still do them. And again, remember, you have to decide what is right for your practice. You are ultimately responsible for it. But there's still a lot of offices that do a predetermination before they actually engage in any treatment. And I personally don't really understand, unless I am legally required to in whatever jurisdiction I practice in, or I'm required to by the insurance. Let's say it's a plan that I'm a member of, I'm a participating provider, and I'm required to send a pre-D. I don't know why I would send a pre-D. Because, in a lot of cases, I've heard the argument advanced, and this is what Sabrina was mentioning as well. How am I going to know what the patient's portion is going to be if I don't send a predetermination? Well, that's why you get the data on the insurance company so you can estimate what their portion is going to be. We talk about this a lot in our financial coordinator training course on DDS Success. But it's not that difficult if you have an idea, especially if you have multiple patients from that has this same insurance plan. You have an idea of what they're going to pay and what they're not going to pay, and if you're going to get an alternate benefit, and all this type of stuff. You know these things. You also know what type of documentation they're going to require in order to pay a claim. But ultimately, a predetermination, and some people don't know this. I thought that this was is not a guarantee of payment. If you're doing predeterminations, read one. Go grab one and look at it, and you'll see it says it is not a guarantee of payment. I have seen predeterminations sent in for payment and get denied. So it is not a guarantee of payment. And if you're talking about a $6,000 or an $8,000 case, and you're looking for a pre-D to get that $1,000 in patient portion, what's the point at that point? The patient's going to owe at least $5,000, if not more. And it's usually a very easy thing to handle, but a lot of attention and effort is put into these predeterminations. Again, you have to do what is real to you. And obviously, if you're obligated to do them, you need to do them. But, if I'm being asked personally, my opinion, should you do them? I would say, absolutely not. But again, you have to do what is real to you. You can pretty much estimate what your patient portion is going to be by knowing what the insurance company normally pays and figuring out what the case is going to cost. And you'll also know if your fees are above what the insurance company normally pays and things of that nature. The other side of this, too, is, and this is where you would be taking it a step further, is whatever financial arrangements you're going to make. Let's say I'm the patient. You're making financial arrangements with me. And I've agreed that I'm going to pay half down and half in 30 days. And let's say I have insurance. Well, I have an estimated insurance participation in this case. It's a $6,000 case. Your estimated my insurance will pay $1,000. Well, part of the agreement I'm signing with you should indicate that if I am not, my insurance does not pay what's expected, that I'm going to owe the balance. This is something that has to be confronted. And because, again, if you don't, you're going to end up with some type of an upset at the end of all this. But again, you could do a pre-D on me. My insurance say they're going to pay could say they're going to pay $1,000, and they still don't, and I'm going to owe that money anyway. So, again, predetermination, up to you what you want to do with it, but you should be able to estimate a patient co-payment if they have insurance pretty easily. If they don't have insurance, it's even easier because they owe it all. And you would have different methods of them paying. Again, paid in full, prepay, half down, half down, a third, extended. You might just have half down and extended, whatever is real to you. Now, how would you roll this out? Well, first off, everybody has to know and understand this financial policy. Who's involved? If I'm the receptionist, maybe I don't need to know it. It'd be good to know it though. But if I'm the financial coordinator, if I'm the office manager, if I'm the treatment coordinator, if I'm the doctor, I have to know these things. All right. And we're all thinking with it. So when you're the doctor and you're presenting treatment, or your treatment coordinator is doing financial arrangements, you all know it and you're thinking with it because there's really no other options. And if, let's say you've done a treatment presentation, again with me, $6,000 case, you sent me off with your treatment coordinator, and I'm presented with the different financial options, well then, and I want to do something different than that, that would need special approval from you, the owner doctor. That is not the treatment coordinator's call. And that's important because if you set that precedent, like, let me give you an example. So let's say we have those three options. Let's say these are your only three options. I can do a long-term payment plan. I can do a third down, third, half down, or paid in full and get 5% off. Let's say those are your options. I have a $6,000 treatment plan. I have no dental insurance. I go see your treatment coordinator, and I'm excited to do the treatment. I want to do it. And he or she says, all right, well, here are the payment options. She shows them to me, he or she. And I look and I go, well, here's the problem. I'm refinancing my house right now, so I'm not allowed to, apply for any credit or it's going to mess up my interest rate. And I can't use my credit cards. But here's what I could do. The appointment's not for 30 days. Or I'm sorry, rather. My refi is closing in 14 days and the appointment is in 16 days. Could I give you $1,000 down now to secure my time, and I will give you the balance the day my refi closes? All right, well, I would probably do that, but you don't want the treatment coordinator deciding whether that's a yes or a no. This is where you'd go, well, let me just check it. I'd have to get approval on that, but I think it's pretty cool. They go, they check it with you. You're like, yeah, it sounds fine. Then they can do it. If you allow them to do things like that without getting approval, then in their mind, that becomes your financial policy. The next time it happens, they do it. And then sometimes it's not as good of a scenario as that. And you find that the patient pays $1,000 down, then they come in and they go on a payment plan that's unacceptable to the practice after you've actually presented the treatment. Do you see? So any alterations or deviations from policy you want approved, and they should be approved by the owner doctor before they're actually engaged upon or it becomes a problem. But everybody's thinking with it. Everybody understands it. Everybody is drilled on it. Everybody has all the different nuances of it down. You implement it, you tweak it, and as new things develop, you can always you stay on top of those. And if you're taking crypto, all of a sudden you add that to your financial policy. And obviously, you'd want to make sure that any financial arrangements that are being made are being done in accordance with this internal financial policy. And if you have employees that aren't following it, and it's good, sensible financial policy, you potentially have a problem. And the last thing I'd note here is, what about patients? Let's say you design this new financial policy for your practice, and you have patients of record that have always operated a little bit of a different way. They've just done things a little bit differently. Maybe you've had a patient who's been with you for 20 years and, they always they get the treatment done, you bill them, and they pay within 30 days. And that's what they've always done. And they've done it for 20 years and have never, ever, ever paid a day late. Well, in those cases, you could just let them keep doing that if you're comfortable with it. They've established credit with you to a degree. Or don't be surprised. You could offer them these payment options, and maybe they want to prepay and they pay that day, and that's kind of nice, right? You could always give them the options, but if it's somebody who's got an established history with your practice and you're comfortable, fine, let them continue to do it. But again, that is the doctor's call. The doctor should be the one deciding on that. You don't want that being decided randomly around the office. All right, so the last thing I'd add, I guess, if you wanted to make this even a little bit easier, if you're doing and we've talked about the mechanics of the treatment presentation process in prior episodes. We also go into that extensively at the MGE Communication and Sales Seminars. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out more about those. But what may not be a bad idea, the doctor owner is supposed to be discussing fees with patients when presenting treatment, or at least it might be a doctor associate if they're involved in the sales process. When you're presenting the treatment plan and you get to the point where you're discussing fees, you could at least mention the fee and send them off with a treatment coordinator. That's sort of the bare minimum. Or you might have a little bit more of the fee discussion, or your treatment coordinator may be having it. This is where, if you have internal financial policy, which is obviously just for your team, you could sort of lift parts of that off and put it into the treatment plan presentation so that you have a patient version, right? In other words, you might have a little form or, a little printout that you have where it has, this is the treatment plan. This is how much it costs, and these are the different ways that they can pay. And you just lay it out there and how much each way would be, right? Because then they can kind of pick an option, which isn't so bad because any of those options are fine for you. You can pay in full and save 5%, so that $10,000 becomes $9,500, or you could put half down, which is $5,000 today, and $5,000 on 30 days from now. You could lay it out right in front of them so they could see it when it comes time to actually figuring out how to pay. Anyway, I know I talked about this at length. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but it actually has far-reaching effects on your practice. I hope this helped. If you have any questions about anything we discussed today or about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or contact us at 800-640-1140. Don't forget I have this financial policies download on the episode webpage. If you want to click the link, you can check that out. Otherwise, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.